Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 5th of September 2023. As I said to you this morning, Syriac Maps, one of my mapping sources, pro-Russian mapper, has started mapping again just very shortly after saying they're not going to post anymore. So actually I'm quite happy with that because I think they do provide an interesting insight into what the Russians are thinking. And so the red lines are back on my map. Whoop-de-doo. So if you are keen to know what the lines mean on my map, here is the map legend. Pause the video, check them out, see what the colours mean. Right, let's go to the northeast sector. As you can see, lots of pins today, so things to talk about. Quite a few minor sort of rejigs of mapping, so not substantial movements either way. We're going to go to the Kupiansk, to Svatovo, to Crimea front line, and go to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, just to dip into some of their observations, or they accumulate the two different sides here, the views from both sides. So Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Yevlash has stated that Russian forces have begun to strengthen their positions near Novohayarivka and have stopped storming Ukrainian positions in the area. Interesting. A prominent Russian mill blogger claimed that the tactical situation near Sinkivka, so that was Novohayarivka, which is here just by Svatova. Then we're going up to Sinkivka, which is up here. So the ISW says a prominent Russian mill blogger claimed that the tactical situation near Sinkivka and Petropavlivka, which is just nearby, was stable. However, a Russian news aggregator claimed that Russian forces took control of an unspecified number of Ukrainian positions and advanced 2 kilometers in the Kupiansk direction. If that kept happening, and we believed that every time, then they'd be past Kupiansk by now. So clearly, at least sometimes, they're not telling the truth. Although ISW has not observed visual confirmation of this claim, Hanna Malia, the Deputy Defense Minister, stated that Ukrainian forces repel several Russian attacks per day in the Kupiansk direction. If we go up to here, so Kupiansk is there, and according to the Russian MOD, which is actually what Syriac Maps really says, so they claim that the Russians are in control of here. Well, a couple of kilometers in the Kupiansk direction from what they supposedly already have gained is that amount of land, so they'll be very close, and actually, you know, it's not the first time we've heard that, so you can add a couple of those kilometers together and then Russians really should be at the edges of Kupiansk, but they're not. They're back here, and in fact there's claims that the Russians have over-egged their advances in this area, and Sinkivka is, well, some Russian mill bloggers have claimed that the northern part of Sinkivka is under Russian control, but I don't think there's been any visual evidence at all recorded as to Russian presence in Sinkivka whatsoever. So, in fact, Andrew Perpetua has been showing Ukrainian advances north of Sinkivka, which would make those kind of claims about Sinkivka completely nonsensical. I would take a lot of the claims about Russian advances in this area with something of a block of salt. However, I think the Russians are having some gains in the Novohayarivka area. So this is Svatova, and to the west of Svatova we have the Zherebets River, which is where the white line kind of runs along. That's the pre-counteroffensive Russian defensive line, and they pushed on. They pushed up to sort of 5 kilometers plus in this area towards the Oskil River over here. And then they've been subsequently pushed back. Well, it appears that the Russians, that is, have made some further gains. I reported that yesterday in the Novohayarivka area. Well, this is reported by Syriac Maps here to kind of go along with that. But of course, you know, we said that yesterday anyway. I'm in the wrong place here. So, yeah, here it is. Novohayarivka. The Russians managed to recapture some lost ground in that area. So that is what Syriac Maps has said. Yeah, just before we go further to the south, I forgot to mention that the Russian Volunteer Corps have supposedly been active in the Bryansk Oblast of Russia, which is over here. So we have Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. So the Russians have been, the Russian Volunteer Corps, that's a pro-Ukrainian Russians, have been active there. I don't know exactly where. Sorry, Bryansk is further up here. So Bryansk, this is the Russian border, Russian-Ukrainian border. Sorry, I haven't drawn my map lines that far up. But yeah, I don't know exactly where, but somewhere over the border here. A couple of FSB border service officers were killed during a raid. Some counterclaims that a Ukraine Nazi commando was destroyed, but yeah, I don't know. Certainly, those Russians perished because there are obituaries and memorials to them. Anyway, some activity across the border. Anyway, coming back to Svatova, to the Novoherivka area, we have some rejigs for the map in favor of Ukraine in that area, according to Syriac maps, but generally the Russians have a slight bit of advantage there. But they claim that they are settling down more to strengthen themselves in a defensive posture rather than to continue further offensives in the area. Possibly, we shall see, I guess. And then coming down to the Crimea forest area, we have some movement for the Russians here. Now, I'm not too sure about this. This is Syriac maps and possibly catching up on previous mapping. So it's not necessarily this has happened in the last 24 hours. They said they weren't going to map, and then now they've done loads of changes representing the last sort of 5 days, I guess, give or take. But anyway, Russian army advanced from a different axis in the Crimea forest, taking a series of positions from the Ukrainian army, according to them. But this is on the back of Andrew Perpetua saying that he doesn't usually do changes so much in the forest area because it's quite difficult to make out. But he is like, yeah, the Ukrainians have advanced here. So whether the Ukrainians did advance and the Russians have pushed back straight away or pushed from a different axis, as they say in that, I don't know. But that is a claim from the Russians that they have made some gains in the Serebryansky forest. We'll see if that is supported by other evidence as we go forward. And then Bilohorivka here, some gains for the Ukrainians here, as according again to Syriac maps. This is something that Andrew Perpetua has said, so this fits in with this is confirmed by other claims. Ukrainian army has managed to enter the filtration plant, which is currently disputed by both sides. I believe, is it here where it is? I talked about this the other day, that the Ukrainians had taken control of some of this. And I think there might be, as I was talking about, an interesting topography in this area. Let's see if I can actually give you a sense of that by going down again into 3D. There we go. I'm not very good at using the mouse here. So as you can see, there is a dip that comes here, a valley that comes into this kind of quarry area, and lots of ground that has variable heights. You have hills and whatnot that really give one side or the other an advantage over certain areas. So here you can see, as we come into the quarry, a real raised area of land here. Russians do not have control of this area, and you would understand that because the Ukrainians would have that height advantage, it would be very difficult for the Russians to take. And then we come in here, and there are possibly some different heights going up here. See if we can get that even more pronounced here. Yeah. So actually, just to the side of that filtration plant, there is high ground going up there. So it just and as we come over here, there's just a lot of interesting topography in this area, which means it is difficult for either side to make sort of huge gains because it's fairly mountainous. And when you see some of the footage that has come out of here, it's firing from one sort of hill to another in the area. So it is, there's a reason why there hasn't been large-scale advances from either side. The Russians have struggled, I guess, to get into Bilohorivka itself, which has been flattened, possibly because the surrounding hills, have been controlled by the Ukrainians, and they can just use that to pepper the Russians as they attack. So anyway, some advances for the Ukrainians there, nonetheless, but there is a bit of to and fro going on in the Bilohorivka sector. Right, let's come out of there, and I won't torture you anymore with my attempts to go into 3D. We have a bit of a rejig for Andrew Perpetua here, kind of giving Russia some land, but it's not so much that. This is a road where the Russians have actually lost a lot of equipment previously. So this is a route up into Ukrainian territory that the Russians have taken. We've seen video footage from months back going forward of large numbers of Russian pieces, getting destroyed here, but they did take some of this land back. It just came at quite a cost. So this area here, I don't know if that's sort of a month, 6 weeks ago. Time is so difficult to get a grasp on when you're doing this every day. But anyway, a bit of a rejig there. And we're going to go into Bakhmut now. So go back to the ISW, see what they have to say. Ukrainian forces conducted operations near Bakhmut and advanced on September 4th. Geolocated footage published on September the 4th, so that's yesterday, indicates that Ukrainian forces advanced east of Orikovo-Vasilivka. Now, this is quite significant because actually we haven't heard too much of the north of Bakhmut for some time now. Sorry, it's come out of Bakhmut there. So we've got Bakhmut itself, and then we've got Dubovo-Vasilivka and Orikovo-Vasilivka. Dubovo-Vasilivka is in the Russian-controlled territory, and Orikovo-Vasilivka here is now Ukrainian-controlled. But again, there's some interesting topography here. As you can see, river kind of valley existing here. A valley, I always think, is a bit too big a word, grandiose word for these, and ravine isn't quite good enough either. So I don't know. But you can see as we come in that, yeah, it is pretty hilly around here. It doesn't do justice to actually how difficult it is to go up some of these areas. That's why Andrew Perpetua accentuates his topography by 300%. It just allows you to really see. But you can see it's very hilly here and actually quite difficult for the troops to fight up on foot. So anyway, that's the topography in this kind of area. All of this area, you can see there are several different kind of valleys or river watercourses there. So the claim is that the Ukrainians made some advances yesterday with geolocated footage to back that up. Let's go and look at that geolocated footage. New footage from Russian source shows slight Ukrainian advance along the E40 road west of Bakhmut. So this is the E40 road coming in here to the northwest. That gives you a geolocation of Russian positions here. This source before looking at Ukrainian positions. We'll see where the Russians are in terms of this activity. So the Russians are there, which we know. Okay, let's now see what the Ukrainians have been doing, and the Ukrainians are being shelled in this position, and there is a number of these. Let's see if this shows any kind of advance. Not at the moment. So that is Ukrainians there being shelled. Let's see if there are further geolocations to be had here. I like me a bit of geolocation, done by other people, of course. I love just putting it in a map and seeing where it takes me. Again, same kind of area. Doesn't really show any advances yet. So this is sometimes what the ISW says, which is slight advances shown by geolocation, and actually it rarely is an advance. It depends what kind of map you're using. And this third one shows, yeah, again, same kind of area. So I don't think that does indicate Ukrainian advances in that area with any of those geolocations. So the ISW, again, I question their idea of what an advance is. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malia stated that Ukrainian forces achieved unspecified successes near Klishchivka, and that Ukrainian forces have liberated 3 square kilometers. I reported that yesterday in the Bakhmut direction over the past week. A Russian mill blogger claimed that on the September 3rd that Ukrainian forces advanced near Andriivka, and that is something that we have seen claimed a number of times, and that's reflected in some mapping changes from both Deep State and Andrew Perpetua, and now some changes in Klishchivka for Suryat map. So we'll come to that in a second. I just want to go up to here, the Kivka area and Yehidne. Well, this is an area where the Russians have put the Ukrainians under a lot of pressure. The Ukrainians have taken some quite a few losses here in terms of equipment and personnel, and so they've kind of taken a step back and looked at other places to continue putting their pressure on. But it seems that the Ukrainians have made some gains in one area, but the Russians in another. So, you know, a bit of give and take in that area, according to Andrew Perpetua, probably analysing the shelling in that area. And then we have Suryat maps. So their claims are that in this northern area of Klishchivka, you have some Russian gains, and this is where we had the other day the Russians gaining all the way out to here, actually. So Andrew Perpetua has them further over here. I think that's what Syriac maps would be tapping into there. The Ukrainian army continue advancing within Klishchivka and control most of the town, very fluid front line. On the other hand, the Russian army managed to recover some positions north of it following a counterattack. It's always interesting how, and I do this as well, I'm sure, how you couch things. So when the Ukrainians advance, it's brackets, but it's a very fluid front line. So in other words, the Ukrainians advance, but hey, it could change either way. Now, I know I do this and I'm aware of it, but I think I do it when that's definitely the case. This isn't so much a fluid front line anymore. Like, I think Klishchivka has been, but we've seen like 5 days of solid Ukrainian advance through Klishchivka. So then to couch that in, but it's fluid, I think tells you more about where Syriac maps and where their agenda is and where their sympathies lie. So anyway, but the Russian army managed to recover some positions north of it following the counterattack or a counterattack. So I don't know how recent that kind of claim is there, but certainly the Ukrainians are gaining more and more territory in Klishchivka. P*11 here says, and I shared this with you in the news piece this morning, that Ukrainians are putting pressure on the Russians in Bakhmut to the point where they're having to draw in reinforcements from elsewhere. So it appears that we come out of Bakhmut, just to give you an idea, that the Russians are bringing in troops from the northeastern sector to help reinforce their attempts to defend in Bakhmut, and that will weaken their own Russian attempts to attack up in that area. But there are claims that I reported this the other day, that the Russians are bringing their more experienced troops down from the northeast sector and replacing them with brand new units that one would presume have been recruited from within Russia. Green around the edges, are brought into this northeastern sector to do the activities up there, and then more experienced soldiers, as I say, are being brought down. So if we go back to that, just to give the conclusion, the Russians are in such a situation near Bakhmut that they have been forced to transfer forces and reserves there for a long time in order to maintain their positions in the city. Since the collapse of the front in that direction could lead to an even greater retreat of the Russian army. Therefore, they can constantly saturate this area with reserves. In recent weeks, there was no information about major advances of our units near Bakhmut. However, the defense forces are going hard and methodical work and are in a more advantageous position for further advancement. The armed forces of Ukraine daily grind the reserves that Russia transferred and continues to transfer to the Bakhmut direction. So that's talking about how it's very attritional there, but to the advantage of the Ukrainians. No reports about some possible advances to the south. So we were just talking about Klishchivka here and how the Ukrainians are gaining territory within Klishchivka, but also we've talked previously about how by Andriivka they have got across the railway line and forced the Russians to the east from that defensive line. No reports then says they've managed to create a bridgehead on the railway tracks near Ozarynivka, but he doesn't know exactly where they are. And the Russians are trying to knock them out. If there is any truth to it, he says it's going to be one of those 3 positions. So on my map, that's going to be either down here south of Ozarynivka or just between there and Kudiamivka, or indeed further up here near Andriivka, but then wouldn't really call that Ozarynivka. So I'm wondering whether it might be to the south of Ozarynivka, if it's happening at all, because the other day we saw some success for the Ukrainians to the east of the canal, pushing the Russians backwards towards the railway line there. So if they're going to have some success there, that would make sense of previous pushes. And that would be quite important for, wrapping up the Russians in this southern area from several sides. They can get across the canal at Kudiamivka. The canal goes under a tunnel, and these 2 tunnels there, and they can get across the canal there. But there seems to be this sort of grey area on the edge of Kudiamivka, but it's not really changed over the last couple of weeks. It could be that they really need to be able to flank Kudiamivka from a number of directions, and that's why Ozarynivka is important for the Ukrainians to take. Anyway, that's Bakhmut. We'll come out of Bakhmut now and go further to the south. There's a couple of pins to look at on the way. So as we come down past Shumi, and we come to Avdiivka, Andrew Perpetua has a little bit of a gain for the Russians along a tree line to the north of Opitny there. That is an area where they had made some gains previously. There is a bit of push and shove here, so sometimes this goes up for the Russians and then it gets taken back down. And here we seem to have them pushing forward again. As you can see that from the here, the free counter-offensive white line showing that they were there, then they'll push back, and then they appear to be, according to Andrew Perpetua, back there again. So this is one of those areas where you might say it is kind of fluid, or there is a bit of push and shove, and there's the evidence to suggest that. But yeah, we'll see how that turns out. See if there's any significant changes going forward in that area. It's been a bit of a stasis around the Opitny and Vodyane area for quite some time now. So I think the attentions of both sides have been kind of drawn elsewhere, but perhaps maybe not. Right, we'll come back down now to the Vuhledar area where things seem to be possibly heating up there, and certainly around Novomayorsk and Novodonetsk, but we'll get there in a second. Here around Vuhledar, Suriyet Maps has some improvement for the Ukrainians here, just north of Pavlivka, and exactly what I talked about yesterday, which is that this was grey area for Andrew Perpetua, whereas this was under control of the Russians for Suriyet Maps. So I didn't change the defensive lines yesterday, but Suriyet Maps has now changed their defensive lines, and that is because this, I don't know what kind of area this is, some kind of industrial or agricultural enterprise there set up that is under control of the Ukrainians now, putting pressure on Pavlivka itself, whilst also pressuring around Shevchenko, although they've kept to the river along here, and I think that's quite difficult for the Ukrainians to break past, and that was certainly the case last year when they tried to do it then. But it could be a case of coming through between Pavlivka and Shevchenko and being able to somewhat encircle Pavlivka there. Might be one of the options. Anyway, there's talk about Novomayorsk and Novodonetsk quite a bit. Activity around Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. I think it's not a new front, but it's extending this Velika Novosilka front, and I think that you are starting to see this sector start to get a bit hot again as the Ukrainians might have finished refitting and are now going back on the counter-attack. Russian channel Military Informant reports that the Ukrainians have restarted offensive operations towards Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. In the past week, there have been several reports from the Russian side that the Ukrainians were building up troops, and now the enemy has drawn up additional reserves, they say, under the cover of artillery fire. It was able to overcome minefields and land troops on the outskirts of Novodonetsk and neighbouring Novomayorsk, where fighting is now taking place. So that is this kind of claim that actually they've dropped troops off and they're fighting infantry battles on the outskirts of Novodonetsk. As you can see from Andrew Perpetua, he's already had the north of Novodonetsk as a grey zone, not so for Suriyet Maps. And Novomayorsk is very close to being, the Russian front lines or defensive line are just, covering the whole of Novomayorsk, but only just. So the claim there is that there's fighting at both of those settlements. If we come to look at what the Vostok Battalion says, or Khodorkovsky of the Vostok Battalion, a Russian unit, saying after several days of artillery preparation, the enemy moved on to the offensive operations in Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. The most active is the Novodonetsk. Breakthrough attempts are made using a large number of armored vehicles. So it's not just equipment, not just infantry fighting. He's claiming there's armored equipment as well. It could be that the armored equipment drops off the troops and then skedaddles, or it could be that it is a kind of combined arms move there. So that's all happening in that area. Another source saying the Ukrainian army launched their expected offensive in western Donetsk after days of heavy shelling. And there's this settlement of Kamenchik here that, a week or so ago, they were talking about interdicting this road between Novodonetsk and Kamenchik. We haven't really heard anything about it. And since then, the Ukrainians went on an operational pause there. I wonder whether they're going to continue trying to attack there. I'm sure they'll be attacking Novodonetsk from several directions, trying to flank it. Anyway, the final source in this area says that, this is Euromaidan Press, Ukrainian troops are starting to fight on the outskirts of Zavitnya Bazyanye village and the southern front, Mariupol to Berdyansk axis. So we heard the other day that the Ukrainians were attacking there, that were in that village, and then it was later pulled back as a claim as being not true. But it's only a matter of time, I guess, before the Ukrainians do start trying to take Zavitny Bazyanya. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Ukrainians are there today. It's kind of protected by the river that meanders its way around there, and that's why you won't have seen it attacked so far. I think if it had just been, south of Uruzhany without the river there would be activity there still. But I think this gave the Ukrainians a good opportunity to do an operational pause and work out how best to navigate, their way around taking Zavitny Bazyanya. There's one bridge that goes across the river. I can't imagine that is still standing, so that will be a challenge for them. But I'm sure that's well within their capabilities. So that's the Donetsk Oblast, and we're going to move now to the west, past sort of Pryutne, on past Marfapil, where there's been some activity, and Drozhnyanka over the past week, and move to Robotyne, where it's all happening still. Right, what are the claims? Well, the first thing is this footage has just come out today. Around Robotyne, the first Challenger tank has been destroyed, apparently. I thought it was referring to that one covered in ERA, but I don't think it is. I think it's referring to, let's expand this, a tank that's seen to the left of this vehicle as it drives. Might have been even at the beginning of the footage. Is it coming up now? Beginning of the yeah, I think it's that one. That could be the Challenger they're referring to right at the beginning of the footage there. Yeah, I think it slows down on this. Yeah, so it's that one to the left there. Oh, that's the one that slows down. Yeah, so there, I think that's a Challenger that's definitely looks beyond economical repair there. That is smoking and looks like it's very much on fire and not in a good way. So that is a first confirmed loss of a Challenger 2, and most of the pretty decent sources like Ukraine Weapons Tracker that knows their weapons is reporting that. So that's being widely reported. Okay, then as we go to Robotyne, let's see what Suryat Maps first says. They are not quite as charitable to the Ukrainians as other mappers. So they are saying that the Ukrainian army managed to recapture the southern part of Robotyne. They were still holding on to this idea that the Russians were still operating in the south of Robotyne. Following the capture of an important hill adjacent to the town, in addition, troops managed to recapture more territory east of the main Russian defense line and west or northwest of Lvov. So there are some successes for the Ukrainians here, but it doesn't go as far as other mappers have gone, which is to say that they have broken in the Ukrainians to that manned trench line, the corner of that manned trench line. Here, Getty says heavy fighting continues in the area. The situation is dynamic. Positions during the day move from one side to the other. Counterattacks of the Russian armed forces continue southeast of the village of Robotyne. I mean, this is a fluid front line. This is going back to what Suryat Mats was saying in Bakhmut, in Klishchivka. This is fluid. Like, they are swapping hands several times a day. And northeast of the village of Novoprokopivka, southwest of the village of Lvov, the Russian forces are counterattacking. From the field, they report the arrival of reinforcements from Crimea. So the Russians are getting their reinforcements in. But north of Novoprokopivka, the Ukrainians have had geolocated success and now control some of those trenches. So this is in that area that we were talking about over the last few days, and this is admitted here by Suryat Mats, but actually some of these Russian trench lines that have been very difficult for the Ukrainians to take have been taken, and they control them, which means that they should be able to flank Novoprokopivka from the east as well as attacking it from the north. So that is the claim there. And then we move to the east of Novoprokopivka and towards Lvov. So Ukrainians have advanced west of Lvov by entering apart the infantry trenches behind the anti-tank ditches. So the anti-tank ditches are these ones here, that grey line coming up along there and north of Lvov. Then you have Lvov, and you've got this gap between the two trench lines, the anti-tank and then the manned trenches. And it's the corner of these manned trenches there that the Ukrainians have taken control of. If they can advance southwards, Russian defensive positions west of the infantry trench become untenable, and heavy armour can be transferred in, making the anti-tank ditch useless. So this is this is about gaining, and I guess if we bring up Andrew Perpetua's map, that might be easier to see because he's got the trench lines. I want to see if I can get trench lines on my map, talking to JR about that. But if we go to the Robotina area, and we'll see this position with the trenches, we'll get them up, fortification lines, there you go. So it appears that they are in these manned trenches there, the Ukrainians, and if they can roll up towards Verbove, then that's going to be significant, but also roll down southwards. And then once they take a larger control, more robust control of these trench lines, they'll be able to move mechanized equipment across both trench lines and then be able to bring mechanized equipment to bear both on Verbove itself and then in rolling down the trench lines and attacking them from behind. The hope for the Ukrainians is that this land between the man trench here and another line of trenches here won't be as heavily mined because the Russians will themselves be using that land to travel between their defensive lines. But now that this has been compromised, the Russians will be wanting to mine this area. The question is, do they have the mines, given that they've had logistics hit, and do they have the ability to set those mines either by sappers or by, do they have the mines that they can send up by their self-propelled guns to litter this area? And given that there's been such a high attrition of artillery in this particular area, as you know, and given that the Ukrainians will be advancing, I don't know whether the sappers or the artillery will be able to do that, which means that it might be quicker for the Ukrainians to now continue advancing. That's the hope for the Ukrainians here. So anyway, as we go on, that was what Noel Reports was saying, and he showed some video evidence to back up the idea that the Ukrainians have taken the trenches in that area. Although, as I said in the news piece, the problem for the Ukrainians, as soon as they take trench lines, they then are telegraphing to the Russians where they are. And the Russians will have all the geolocated coordinates, all the coordinates of these trench lines ready to go. And they'll be like, right, okay, we need to hit those trenches with all our artillery. So if they have artillery around here, they're going to be absolutely focusing on the Ukrainian troops as they hit these trenches. And that's exactly what's happened according to this video. They are getting hit with Russian artillery already. If it's not booby-trapped, then you're just going to get hit by artillery. So it's a bit of a poisoned chalice. Getty says Ukrainian fighters continue to successfully expand the bridgehead in the Verbove village direction. A large stronghold and fortified area located in the area of the second line of dugouts of the Russian army was taken under control and cleared. That's going to be the same sort of area. And this is all being geolocated and confirmed by, for example, geo-confirmed here with video evidence and then reference to other people like Defmon and mapping himself, doing his own geolocations or relying on geolocations of others. Possible expansion of the Ukrainian penetration of the first Surovikin line. Based on the alleged Russian shellings, the Ukrainian forces have entered the manned trenches on the high ground, and lots more people making those claims as well. Indeed, Deep State Map has gone as far as to show that themselves. I'm just showing you all the different sources that are making these big sort of claims. Here's the GIF that Deep State Map have done, showing the extent of the gains that Ukrainians have made fairly quickly. I was expecting, you could have expected this to have taken longer, but they have managed to take this difficult confluence of trenches to the northwest of Verbove there. And I think that's been really important. Show you that on Andrew Perpetua's map. That's these trenches here. And that is, as you can see with the blue shading here, that is now comfortably under the control. It's not grey zone. That is now Ukrainian controlled trench line. So they can roll up the trench line to the north of Verbove and hopefully roll up the manned trenches into Verbove itself there. So lots of different sources to make these similar sorts of claims. Russian shelling Ukrainian positions. So this is, further to the claims of what's going on in Robotina and Verbove. Let's just have a chat about these pins. So Ukrainian grey zone, or Ukraine had taken control of the grey zone. Now that's what I was just talking about. those tank ditches coming to the north of Lvovy. They've also made gains down here, as according to both Deep State Map and Andrew Perpetua. So they pretty much agree with where the Ukrainians have got to, and that is possibly further than is suggested by. Well, okay, no, that's pushing the Russians back. That's not them controlling. So the Russians have been pushed back quite considerably from their trench lines, and it's going to be a case of clearing up the contested zone. So yeah, anyway, moving back to my map to look at some of the other pins. Yep, Ukrainian game south of Robotyne, as we talked about. And so that's going well for the Ukrainians there. But then we come over to the west, to Kamyanska, and I mentioned this yesterday, potentially some gains around here. Well, actually, both mappers have signified that the Ukrainians have made some gains. And quite importantly, as far as Andrew Perpetua's mapping is concerned, it's not just this area to the east of this road coming down. So, well, Syriac Maps, they have the claim that recent video footage shows Russian artillery shelling Ukrainian positions within Kamyanska, and he's corrected the front line. Ukrainian army controls about 70% of the town, but that includes the town to the north of the river. So it's all about trying to take this town to the south of the river. But Syriac Maps does not have the Ukrainians the other side of the road, and just about taking area over here. But I always find it interesting when Andrew Perpetua does a bit of looking at objective evidence, like data of actual shelling. So if the Russians are shelling this position, then the Ukrainians must be in this position as well. And so that's really significant, because this southern area of Kamyanska is now, it's split by the river, and you've got this long been the case that this settlement has been, the southern half controlled by the Russians and northern half controlled by the Ukrainians. But now the Ukrainians are really starting to make advances into that southern section of the town. There's quite a lot of town there and a lot of work to do, but that, I think, is hugely significant if that is the case, because they would want to be able to use this road. They want to get down to Vasilivka, which is itself quite a major logistics hub for, as you can see, all the roads there for this kind of region. That's what's going on there. There's some claims of Kherson that the dachas are being hit on the left bank of Kherson. I don't know exactly where this is, but this is fairly significant explosions are taking place. And these FAB, KAB 500 guided bombs are a nuisance, more than a nuisance. They're pretty horrific, and the Ukrainians hate them. Good reason. The Russians are able to use these more than the Ukrainians are able to use JDAMs. They just have a much more active air force that, although they don't have air superiority, I think they have an air advantage in the contested airspace, and that allows them to do things like this with greater frequency than the Ukrainians are able to do that to the Russians. Go and check out Perun's latest video on the state of the air war going on at the moment. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for today. Hopefully that was of use. Lots going on. It seems that the Ukrainians are picking up activity in the Velika Novosilka salient, but also near Vuhledar, also obviously south of Bakhmut, possibly even Bilorivka, and west to Kamyanska. So I think we are starting to move to towards the main counteroffensive thrust, and that might be reflected by the fact that a Challenger 2 has been lost. That's the first Challenger 2 lost, which means that they are using their reserve equipment. So we're seeing Leopard 2s, we're seeing Challenger 2s. There isn't too much more in terms of, yes, CV90s being used in a greater number, maybe. But generally, these are your main units that the Ukrainians have. They will soon have some Abrams to bring to bear as well. But I think we are starting to see things kind of move towards a major counteroffensive phase. But the Ukrainians will be losing troops in doing that. Attacking is tough. And when Russians are so well defended and dug in, it's going to be particularly tough, and they will lose a lot of people and equipment. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget, there's a live stream coming out later today.